So I want to look at some of the techniques for working with data here in StatCrunch, and I've got a file here that has some samples of U.S. individual incomes um, to work with to look at how we can create a frequency distribution and how we can create a histogram and all the different tools that we can use. And so to do that, we have this data here, and here I just have income, individual income, and I've got a bunch of different values here. And I can go in and I can do under applets this handy tool, histogram with sliders, and this just allows me, once I select the column where the data is, I don't want to change the where or the title. I could do U.S. individual income if I want to get a title on there, and hit compute, and it gives me a pretty nice histogram here, um, which has some of the data. It doesn't tell me how many are in each of these bars, but it tells me this first bar here is from 0 to 25,000. Next one's from 25,000 to 50,000. And you can see that the bracket on there's a bracket on the left and a parentheses on the right. That just means that we're including the left-hand number, but not the right-hand number in that bar. And we're going to talk about what else we can do with this here in a second. But um, we see that it automatically picked a starting point of 0 and a bin width of 25,000. Now, we're looking at incomes here, which obviously do range from near 0 up to, in this case, somebody up here in the 500,000 range in this sample. And so we have some outliers out here. It's skewed to the right. And I can adjust this bin width here and make it up to 30,000 or even 50,000, but that gets rid of some of the what I'd call the granularity of it, which allows us to sort of see where people are, right? We've grouped a huge chunk of people into this group from 0 to 50,000 here, and it doesn't really tell us about what's happening inside of that group there. So I'm going to go back and just do this from 0 to 25,000 again for the first group and on out from there. And this just allows me to experiment with different starting points and different bin widths. I can slide these around to get the desired number of classes. Now, in this case, I've probably got more classes than we need, and we'll talk about that some in class. But deleting this result here, I'm going to go in and do data bin. And what that allows us to do is to create a new column off of the income here that tells us sort of what the classes are. And I'm going to use fixed width bins starting at 0 with a bin width of 25,000 that we saw from that previous one there. And we're going to include the left endpoint when I do this. And I hit compute, and it tells me where everybody is. What that allows me to do now, and I can go over here and delete this option now. What that allows me to do is to go in here and do stat tables, and I can get a frequency table from this. And the frequency table on that bin, we can do frequency, relative frequency, and holding down Control or Command if you have a Mac. We can select a couple other things to see as well. And we want to order these by value ascending. We want to keep it in the order that it was. We don't want to order it by frequency or count ascending or descending or by how it appears in the worksheet. We'll keep it at value ascending, and we'll talk about that some as we go along. And this other star here, if percent is less than, we might want to use that, and we'll talk about that again here in a minute. So when I hit compute, it gives me this nice table. And we have 0 to 25,000, 25,000 to 50,000, so on and so forth down the list. A lot of different, a lot of different numbers there. And it does stretch way out, right? We don't have all of the groups represented, right? We're missing from 375,000 up to 400,000. There was nobody in that group. And we're missing from 425,000 up to 450,000 and from 475 up to 525. So we're missing some classes here. If you're in that window and you hit Control A, that will select everything that's there, and then Command C will copy it. And this will nicely paste into Word or into Google Docs. So if I open up a new Word document here, then I can work with this. And I'm gonna have to clean this up though, is the downside with these frequency distributions. And so we have this one here should actually go from 0 to 24,999, and then this one should go from 25,000 up to 49,999. And we want to clean up the whole table here, and we go through and we check to make sure that every class is represented. It looks like until I get down here, every class is represented, so I can then come in here and insert a row above, and we want to go from 275,000 to 299,999. And ideally, all of the rest of these would be corrected as well. But we see we have what, 0 in this case here, 0 there. Then this next one here, the cumulative frequency will still stay at 4988, and the cumulative relative frequency will be at 0.9976, or 0.9976. And so if we have missing classes, we do need to add those in. And it's a little tedious to do that, but still easier than doing it by hand when we have a huge set of data. But the reality is that most of the time, instead of dealing with frequency distributions, what we want to deal with instead, and we do have to deal with them some, but what we want to deal with instead generally is just using the technology to go ahead and get our graph. And so I can go in here and do graph histogram on income, where we don't want to do where, we don't want to group by, we want to do frequency to start with here, and we'll start our bins at 0 with a width of 25,000 is what we decided. And at this point here, and we can show some other things with it, and we'll talk about those as we go along. But we see that we have this nice histogram here that sort of summarizes that data. It has our graph for everything that's there. And now we can see the frequencies in each group pretty easily from this. We can show those. You can actually go and do options and edit, and you can show the value above the bar. And what that allows us to see then is how many are in each bar, so that can give us some additional tools there. The Ogive's a little more tricky to work with then, because what we've got to do for the Ogive, and I'm going to go back here again and do stat tables, frequency on bin income again, and I'm just going to look at cumulative frequency here, and I'm going to go ahead and group. I'm going to do other if the percent is less than the, and here we have to decide what we want to do. Do we want to do 1%? And everybody that's above 1% goes in this other group here. And that gets us down to, several classes here, but we still have quite a few. It looks like 81 values in between 175,000 and the top there. And so I'm going to go back in and do options, edit, and do less than 0.5%. So really getting everybody up to, well, now just 200,000. So we're still, we could edit that a little bit more, maybe 0.25. So now we've got all but 18 of them here that are represented, and that's pretty comprehensive. And what I want to do is I'll go back and edit this one more time, and I'm going to say store in data table, and go over here and hit compute. And what we've got here is the bin in this column here, and the cumulative frequency off to the right. And what we need to do is put our lower class limit here, and I'm just going to put income for this, and we put our lower class limits of 0, 25,000, 50,000, 75,000, 100,000, 125,000, 150,000, 175,000. I would pick one that had a ton of values to type in. 225,000 and 250,000 And then here I'm just going to say 250,000 plus. Or we could go in and just type, up to whatever the maximum value was that we had. We had up to, I don't remember where we even went to, the maximum value. We'll put that in there and do, let's see, summary stats on the column on income first, and just see what our maximum is. The maximum is 535,000 there. So I'm just going to type in 535,000. So it's farther off to the right. It's going to mess up our scale just a little bit, but we'll see how that turns out here in a second. It's not consistent, but we don't want to really type in all those values, even though we could going on out. And then these cumulative frequencies here, I want to copy using Control-C and then paste over here, leaving this top one blank because we start at 0. So the cumulative frequency will start at 0, and then it counts up from there. And now if I go in and I do graph scatter plot, X variable is the income in that second column over here, and then the Y variable is the cumulative, and display, here I want to display points and lines, and hit compute, and we get this graph for the ogive. And you can see that because I left off all these points in between 250,000 and 535,000, that we just have this line connecting over. But it does give us a picture of where the data is. And if we wanted to, we could have done, instead of cumulative frequency, we could have done cumulative relative frequency as well to work with this as a percentage if we had wanted that. So that should take care of everything from 2.2 that you'll need to be able to use to work with StatCrunch and the data sets.